Making any ceramic sculpture, I suggest starting with a sketch. The sketch doesn't have to be very detailed. In my opinion, the main thing is to decide on the shape and proportions of your future piece. This is important, though that later in the process of sculpting, you already know the future shape of your product. Now I'll talk a little about the clay that we will use. This is a professional ceramic mass ideal for hand building and making sculptures. If you look closely, you find small hard inclusions. These tiny fragments perfectly keep the shape of our sculpture. Despite this, the clay is very soft and plastic. Not only a professional sculptor, but even a beginner can cope with it. Of the tool at this moment, we only need a pottery wire to detach a small amount of clay and a metal scraper to make the surface smooth. I also recommend using a small wooden board as a stand for a sculpture so that it can be easily handled from all sides. Now we proceed directly to sculpting. Guided by a prepared sketch, we begin to build the base of the sculpture. To do this, we need to give the clay the shape of an extended cylinder and lay it in a ring on a wooden board. In the same way, we form the second layer. After we have laid out a sufficient amount of mass, we should slightly flatten and plane what we have. Because the clay is wet and sticks well, we don't need to use a slip. It is enough just to pay attention to the entire surface and make it smooth and build a general shape. Also, do not worry about the similarity of the walls of our sculpture. Since the sculpture shape is organic, the walls can be thinner in some places and thicker in some other places. Continue to increase the height and give the shape to the sculpture. As the height of the figure increases, follow its general shape according to a prepared sketch. Also, don't forget to smooth the surface inside and out from time to time. However, it's not necessary to bring the smoothness of the surface to perfect, as we will continue to work on it after we complete the development of the full shape. After we have finished working on the general shape of the sculpture, we need to leave our piece for a while, so that the mass dries up and we can start detailing the surface. After the base of our sculpture dries a little and becomes rather hard, we can start working on the decorative part. To work on the surface decor, we need certain tools. I use a potter's needle to mark the places where I will cut the holes in the future. The clay hole cutter is convenient to use if we need to make small and medium holes of the same size. Pottery knife for making large holes and cutting clay. Sponge for working with the surface. Scraper for roughening clay parts to be sticked. Now we can start decorating. With a needle I mark the places where the holes will be cut out in the future. At this stage, we need to determine the size and location of future holes in accordance with the shape of the sculpture. Since my figure tapes towards the top, with each new line the holes will become smaller. I also recommend placing the holes diagonally, as this allows our sculpture to hold its shape better. When the marking is applied, we begin to make holes. I recommend starting at the top to lighten the weight of the structure and reduce the stress on the bottom of the sculpture, thereby providing deflection. It is quite convenient to make small and medium holes using a hole cutter. Holes of a larger diameter we can make with a potter's knife. When all holes have been made, we proceed to the next stage of decoration, specifically detailing. According to the sketch, I need to add small protruding parts in the places between the holes. To attach one piece of clay to main mass, we need to use slip, liquid clay of the same quality that we use for modeling. Apply the scratches with a scraper in places where the parts should be stuck. In my case, I use a small desert fork as a scratcher too. Glue a piece of clay and give the desired shape. Continue decorating until you reach the top. In this case, we start decoration from the bottom of the sculpture, thereby strengthening its base. However, we still follow the proportions and the sculpture expands to the bottom and the holes increase. We build the protruding parts from large to small size. At this stage, you will need to show maximum patience, as the decorating process takes a lot of time and consists of many repetitive steps. Also, when working on the detail from time to time, you should not forget to look at the work as a whole so as not to lose the wholeness of the composition and shape. Since our sculpture is only a copy of a form that exists in nature, don't try to make it perfect. Just like in nature, there may be some imperfections in our sculpture, which in the future will give it uniqueness and add artistry. Don't spend too much time detailing at this stage of sculpting. Instead, it is important to work on the form as a whole. In the process, you will begin to notice the uniqueness of clay as a material, because despite the original intention, closer to finishing, our sculpture slightly modified its shape. Our task is not to try to stick to an exact sketch, but to create listening to the clay, so that as a result we get a harmonious and natural form. I would call this stage of creating a sculpture the most creative and requiring special attention and concentration. After the last piece of the protruding element is glued and formed, we can devote some time on the surface. To do this, we need a container of water and a sponge. The main idea of this process is to give the integrity of the surface by smoothing out obvious defects and roughnesses. It is important to spend time on this process until the mass hardness and to such an extent that it was difficult to correct these nuances. Then we finish work on the surface, we can put the sculpture to dry until it gets leather hard state. When the sculpture has desiccated a little and has cased to the form, you can proceed to the final stage of surface processing. For this, we will use water and the sponge again. With the sponge, moisten it with water, thoroughly wipe the entire surface by giving it smooth superficies. If possible, pay attention to the inner surface of the sculpture, despite the fact that it is not so visible at first view. If necessary, the slightly moisturized surface can be smoothed with your fingers. Since you are satisfied with the result, the sculpture can be left to dry completely. Depending on the thickness of the sculpture, its dimensions, and the chosen clay, the drying time varies from a few days to a week. It is important to wait until it's completely dry before placing the sculpture in the kiln. Checking whether the sculpture has dried or not is quite simple. Just put the back of your palm on the surface, and if the sculpture is cold to the touch, then there is still moisture left in it. If the product is at room temperature, then it's dry. When installing the sculpture in the kiln, be extremely careful and attentive, because after complete drying, the ceramic product is very fragile. According to the supplier's recommendations, the product is fired at the required temperature. When the sculpture is ready, it can decorate your interior, become a great gift, or even an art object at an exhibition. I wish you success in your creative activity.